as reserves of armored vehicles run out amid catastrophic losses in Ukraine and Western Russia. The Russian military is normalizing assaults in civilian cars. And not just any civilian cars, but Lada Zhigulis, compact models that are just 16 feet from fender to fender and weigh slightly more than 1 ton. When the first Russian assault groups climbed into their Zhigulis and rolled out for nearly suicidal attacks across the drone-patrolled no-man's land in eastern Ukraine last fall, it was possible to dismiss the Zhiguli assaults as one-offs by the most desperate and vehicle-deprived Russian regiments. It's no longer realistic to paint such a rosy picture for the Russian military's mechanization efforts. With losses of armored vehicles and other heavy equipment now exceeding 15,000, Zhiguli assaults are becoming more common. Open-source analyst Mukhlasin mused as they scrutinized yet another video feed from a Ukrainian drone unit blowing up Russian Zhigulis attacking Ukrainian positions. Russia builds maybe 200 new BMP-3 fighting vehicles and 90 new T-90M tanks annually, as well as a few hundred other new armored vehicles including BTR-82 wheeled fighting vehicles. But Russia has been losing armored vehicles at an annualized rate of 6,000 a year. For 2 years, the Kremlin comfortably made up the 4-figure gap between losses and production by pulling old Cold War vehicles out of long-term storage. The Cold War storage yards once held vast stocks of old tanks and other armored vehicles, but now even these stocks are running low. Open-source analyst Jompy explained it best, taking BTR-wheeled fighting vehicles as an example. It looks like Russia still has overall 2,358 stored BTR 6070-80s out of the 3,673 it had in storage before the war, Jompy wrote in December. In reality, most of the vehicles are older BTR 60s and 70s, and in poor condition, Jompy added. How poor? They squinted at satellite imagery of the 1063rd Logistics Center in Sarajevo, near the Russian border with Mongolia, and additional imagery of vehicle parks in the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad, as well as Smolino, just west of Moscow. It turned out, none of the vehicles in Sarajevo had moved from their parking spots since 2020. The ones in Kaliningrad had been immobile since 2018. Those in Sarajevo hadn't moved an inch since 2010. A vehicle that doesn't move for so long is a dead vehicle, Jompy explained. And if you don't believe me, you surely have seen what happens to abandoned civilian cars over just a few years in the open air. For many months, observers have debated if and when the Russian armed forces would reach a critical tipping point, the exhaustion of vehicle generation efforts, and begin a long, painful process of demechanization. The normalization of Lada assaults is a clear sign they've passed that tipping point. Every day the war Russia's wider war on Ukraine grinds on, the Russians will have fewer armored vehicles and will rely more on compact cars to carry troops into battle. Ten months after first attacking Chasiv Yar, a fortress town in eastern Ukraine, Russian troops have finally managed to advance at times, only briefly into the town's central district. The Ukrainian 24th Mechanized Brigade and adjacent units aren't making it easy for them. Taking advantage of Ukraine's newfound tank advantage, the 24th Mechanized has engaged infiltrating Russian paratroopers at point-blank range, on or before January 18. A Russian assault drawn from one of the 3 air assault and airborne regiments arrayed east of Chasiv Yar made a run into the ruins of the town's center, which has absorbed relentless Russian bombardments since last spring. The Russians and their 2 BMD-4 infantry fighting vehicles came to a bad end. Ukrainian infantry hit one BMD with a rocket-propelled grenade, apparently destroying it. The surviving BMD was helpless to resist when one of the 24th Mechanized Brigade's T-72 tanks rolled right up to it and blasted it with a 125mm tank round from just 100 feet away. It would have been unusual earlier in the war for a Ukrainian tank to fight that close. But the battlefield of Russia's 35-month wider war on Ukraine is changing in ways that favor Ukrainian armored forces, even as Russian troops who outnumber Ukrainian troops continue to slowly advance, albeit at enormous cost. The sheer number of Ukrainian drones hovering over the 800-mile front line, tens of thousands arrive at the front. Every month means Russian tanks can only operate from covered positions. One Russian blogger complained in a long missive translated by Estonian analyst War Translated. Russia also deploys tens of thousands of drones every month, but they're shoddier, their operators are generally less experienced, and they must contend with Ukrainian radio jamming that's much more effective than Russian jamming. So while Russian tanks must hide, Ukrainian tanks operate more freely, the blogger claimed. It's not hyperbole. Evidence abounds of Ukrainian tanks fighting closer than ever as the wider war grinds toward its fourth year. That doesn't mean the Ukrainians are winning every battle, or the Russians are losing. Russian regiments might be loath to risk their remaining tanks, but they clearly feel no such qualms when it comes to risking the less powerful BMD fighting vehicles and their infantry passengers. Not every Russian assault group comes to grief at the receiving end of a Ukrainian tank firing from 100 feet away,